Good morning. My name is Stacy Keene, and I am the coordinator of religious education here at First Church Ipswich. And I'm honored to be here to offer worship, prayer, and a sermon today for you. I want to extend a warm welcome to everybody who's out there watching this morning, and to say that no matter who you are, where you come from, no matter how strong your doubts, how strong your faith, you are welcome here. And here, as in the physical church, and there, as in your home, you are a part of this community at First Church Ipswich. So we are so glad you are here this morning, or if you're watching at night, whenever you may be watching, we are glad you chose to tune in today. I have two readings today to ground us in the sermon. And the first one comes from Exodus, and it is the story of Pharaoh oppressing Israel. Now there arose a new king over Egypt, who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, "Behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. And if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land." Therefore, they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. They built for Pharaoh store cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread abroad. And the Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel. So they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves, and made their lives bitter with hard service, in mortar and brick, and in all kinds of work in the field. In all their work, they ruthlessly made them work as slaves. Then the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, "When you serve as midwife to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, she shall live." But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but let the male children live. So the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this and let the male children live?" The midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them." So God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very strong. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, "Every son that is born to the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live." Here ends the reading from the scripture. To pair with that Bible reading, I wanted to read also what is called a midrash. And a midrash is defined by Hebrew scholar Wilda Gaffney, who is actually the author of the midrash that I'm going to read, as imagining a reading while crafting new ones to stand alongside, not replace former readings. So they can be read together to help us kind of deepen our understanding, to try to see ourselves into the story in new ways. Another quick definition I liked was from Vanessa Lovelace. A Jewish mode, it does come from the Judaic tradition, of interpretation that not only engages the words of the text, behind the text, and beyond the text, but also focuses the words left unsaid by each line. So again, another way in, another way to view this story that comes from the Bible. So here's the story of Shipra and Puah, told by Wilda Gaffney in the Midrash tradition. Shipra and Puah call all the birthing women to assemble, telling their overseers that they are passing on Pharaoh's instructions. One Egyptian lingers longer than the others. Puah shoos him out with the ancient womanist refrain, "This is women's business." He leaves. Hundreds of women come to the place of Shipra's tent. Many bring daughters, granddaughters, and nieces whom they are apprenticing in the profession. Some are pregnant. Others are nursing. It takes more than a day for everyone to gather, eat, and rest from their journeys. And there is talk, shop talk, women's words, shared experiences, and new techniques. Herbs to stop the bleeding, herbs to bring on labor, teas to increase milk production, ways to limit pregnancies. Finally, Shipra speaks. She tells them Pharaoh's words. The women gasp. Some mutter. Some shout. Some of the children are frightened. Shipra and Puah shush them and call for calm. Shipra begins to prophesy. God has brought our people a mighty long way, and I don't believe God has brought us this far to leave us. Do not fear this Pharaoh or his warriors, nor his war horses, nor his chariots. God will blow them away like smoke in the wind. In our days, before our eyes, God will break the back of Egypt and wash away its might. Shipra takes her seat, and Puah speaks. Trust in God whose name is holy. This is what we shall do. Deliver the babies. Hide as many of the boys as you can. Raise others as girls. Do not worry about the Egyptians. They will not come house to check on women. They cannot imagine that we would defy the Pharaoh, whom they revere as a living God. The women leave the convocation of birthing women. Days, weeks, then months go by. Pharaoh is too busy to think about the Hebrew birthing women. Someone mentions that the Hebrew people are still growing in spite of the Pharaoh's commandment, and he summons them back to explain themselves. So with the reading of that midrash, I wanted to allow for some space for imagination and creativity. We don't always create this space in our reading of the Bible. And so I hope it helped in some way for you to kind of feel the feelings and get inside that story a little bit. We know this story concerns two midwives. And we know midwifery is a tradition that has been going on for thousands of years across all cultures. I actually remember the midwife who was present for my sister's Laura's birth. Her name was Virginia, and she sat in the corner just rocking and knitting for hours when my sister was having early labor that went on for seemingly days. She was just holding this space for us. She was offering an anchor in the midst of this very intense time. The practice of midwifery helps to create space and time for the body to do what it needs to do. We live in a world that often forces us to be timely and efficient in giving birth and in even dying and everything in between. So in other words, the practice of midwifery honors the full human, one who may take 5 hours to birth or 2 days, one who may want to stand, to squat, to walk during labor, one who may need to ditch her birth plan because she needs more interventions or medical supports than she had thought. But bottom line, the goal is that she feels seen and not rushed. I can't help but think of this as a metaphor to the type of love that God can offer us. God sees us as we are, offering God's presence and patience and spaciousness. With God, there is no timetable. Shifting gears to think about the context and the biblical perspective of this story, this story is set at the beginning of the great Exodus narrative. And Exodus in Hebrew means departure from Egypt. So it is the founding story of the Israelites being led out of slavery and bondage in Egypt by Moses to the promised land. So let me point out from this point that the courage of the women helped to lay the foundation for future liberation. And these are two women that I had never heard of before I went to school at Boston University for a Master's of Divinity. And that's perplexing to me and something I hope we can work on addressing. And I think we are at First Church Ipswich. So the new Pharaoh had recently taken power, and this Pharaoh saw the Hebrews not as citizens, but as enslaved people who were meant to serve the empire of Pharaoh. Their worth was now measured by what they produce. I imagine that some of this theme can resonate with us today. Do you ever feel like a cog in a wheel with your work? Like our worth is measured by what we accomplish in a day? I remember when working in home care as a physical therapist, I sometimes wouldn't meet my productivity requirement because a patient had a crisis that required more time, phone calls, coordination. And this didn't count towards my productive time. This was deemed unproductive time. So at the end of the day, the numbers of billable units just didn't measure up to being productive enough. And so if this happened too many times, that would affect, of course, the bottom line with the company, and I'd be called in to meet with my supervisor to troubleshoot on, how I could do better. That obsession with productivity can be harmful in so many ways. We know this. More and more research is supporting this, both physically, emotionally, spiritually. And so it is why I really deeply appreciate this practice of midwifery with its holistic approach to honoring full humanity. It's not just like a clean, timely end result. And we know birth is not typically, it's got some messiness. So it's at this point that the midwives take the lead in this story. Pharaoh wants to reduce the Hebrew population because he feels threatened by their growing numbers. And so he turns to the midwives. And his strategy is to kill all boy infants born to Hebrew women. And he orders the midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, to do just this. So remember the midrash and imagine the conversations that must have happened between the midwives and with the women in their community. At this time in history, also remember that Shiphrah and Puah, being both women and midwives, were seen as the very lowliest in society. So these two women were at risking their own lives by defying Pharaoh's order. And when he comes to demand explanation for the continued growth of the Hebrew population, they use his own stereotyping of Hebrew women to trick him. I love this part of the story, and I know Reverend Rebecca has preached on this before, but I think it's worth bringing up again and again. So they said that they couldn't get to the births in time because the Hebrew women were just birthing too fast, like wild women. And he buys this because this satisfies his notion of superiority over the other. These lowly women midwives become the first deliverers in the book of deliverance, Exodus. They are deliverers of babies. They are protectors of life. They are defiers of oppressors. And they are so clever and so resourceful. So the cleverness and the resourcefulness is what makes me think of this phrase that I came across in my readings. of creative disobedience. So God is working through these women for the cause for freedom. And it also makes me think of another phrase, one that many of us have come to know and appreciate more since the death of the civil rights leader John Lewis, but that he was always pushing people to make good trouble. Yet despite their stirring up of good trouble, Pharaoh doesn't give up. He comes up with another strategy to kill off the Hebrews. It is even more far-reaching, and it is just as horrible and brutal. He goes beyond the midwives and demands now that all Egyptians must take responsibility to murder all male infants. And he orders that all male babies be thrown in the river to drown. The next part of this story is one that many of us know so very well, that Moses is born and is not thrown into the river, but is instead tucked into a basket and set afloat down the river. So this river that is meant to be a river of death actually becomes a river of life, because the babe is discovered by Pharaoh's own daughter, who adopts him, and through the workings of Moses' sister, hires Moses' mother to nurse him while getting paid. So extreme craftiness, resourcefulness, problem solving at its best. So it's another amazing example in the Bible, in Exodus, of women being creatively disobedient to protect life, to stand for God. So let's circle back to the guiding themes of this story for us to better relate to our own lives in this century, in this time. First, Pharaoh used his power to breed fear and distrust of the other and to reign with oppression and violence. We can see throughout history and, of course, today what happens when fear is used in this way. And, of course, the most egregious examples include the Holocaust, the industry of slavery, and the current immigration crisis, and I could go on and on. Pharaoh also degraded the Hebrews through oppressive work conditions, forced labor, and enslavement. In the face of these forms of oppression that are just running rampant, what does God call us to do? I believe that, like the midwives, God calls us to be creative in our disobedience. God calls us to be a midwife to the issues and the people who are being marginalized, forgotten, or killed. We can do this by supporting work that uplifts human worth and dignity. We can help offset the fear of the other by supporting refugees and just speaking up when we need to. And God also reminds us that we are not machines. We are full humans, we are beloved, and we should not have to wear ourselves down in order to survive, thrive, or feel worthy. So while it may feel like a stretch, taking a nap in the middle of your workday could be seen as a form of creative disobedience and a way to honor God. So just don't let the grind wear down your humanity. You are worthy. Shiphrah and Puah, the Pharaoh's daughter, and Moses' mother and sister, Miriam and Zipporah, these are the women of Exodus. These women helped lay the foundation for the liberation of all the Israelites in their resourceful, creatively disobedient ways. They were guided by God's message that all lives are beloved. Through their example, we are reminded that the so-called lowly can subvert the powerful and the oppressors who sow fear and division amongst us. Will you pray with me? Holy God, in this world where there is so much suffering and injustice, and when we are tired from constant movement and pressure to always do more, to survive, to thrive, and even to care for others. Help us to slow down and open ourselves to your love, so that we may strengthen love for ourselves and others and for you, God, so that we may be sustained and uplifted. Open our eyes to those who in our midst are being creatively disobedient. Help us to do the same in our own ways. In our life and with others, may we have the patience and the presence of a midwife walking through a woman through birth that mirrors the patience that God has for us. May we let God be the midwife we need in this life. May it be so. Amen.